Hello, and welcome to a PokemonXD Gale of Darkness video, where today we're going to be completing the game with the duo of Ditto and Smeargle, the two gimmick Pokemon that steal moves from other Pokemon. Now, I do think that this can either go extremely well or very, very terribly, depending on the moves that we have access to and the Pokemon that we're given to transform into. But before we get to any of that, let's go ahead and go over their stats. Smeargle has 55 HP, 20 attack, 35 defense, 20 special attack, 45 special defense, and 75 speed, and Ditto has 48 across the board. And the thing is that the only two stats that really matter to Ditto are its HP, because it doesn't copy that when it transforms, and its speed, because it needs to transform as quick as possible. And of course, the move pools of these Pokemon are incredible. We have Sketch every 10 levels for Smeargle, and Ditto gets Transform. However, Smeargle's Sketch is quite possibly the most broken move in the game, because you can steal an opponent's move. However, this could be a blessing or a curse in the early game, because if there's no good attacking moves right off the bat, because it doesn't get any tutor moves either, it can't even learn Seismic Toss or something to make up that difference. Anyway, with that being said, let's go ahead and move right into it. With our Ditto, in particular, having a docile nature, which doesn't really do anything, but that's kind of alright. Anyway, it gets the Limber ability, which prevents paralysis, which could definitely come in handy. And according to Bulbapedia, of course, it gets Transform. Moving on to Smeargle, it has a Rash nature, raising its special attack but lowering its special defense, which is honestly fine. If I can get it a little harder, that's probably better. And it has the Own Tip ability, which gets rid of any chance of confusion, which is nice. And according to Bulbapedia, of course, it gets Sketched by level 10. So with that, let's go ahead and get right into it. And the first thing I need to check is whether or not I can copy a Shadow move or become a Shadow Pokemon. And I know I could have looked this up, but where's the fun in that? Anyway, I can't transform into a Shadow Pokemon, so that's a bit unfortunate. Can we copy Shadow Rush? And the answer is no as well. But I do have a backup in mind, and that's that this lady's Swablu has the move Peck, which isn't incredibly strong. It's only 30 base power, but if it gets any super effective hits, it is going to be 60 base power. And another nifty thing you can do with Ditto is that you can actually sketch the move that Ditto last used to guarantee you get the move you want. And after getting the move I wanted, I immediately abandoned it because I realized that I could get a better move that is the same base power as a super effective Peck, without the drawback of needing the super effectiveness, and that's that this Whismur has Pound, and because Smeargle is a normal type, it gets Stab, bringing it up to 60 base power. At level 11 I get my first Sketch, and we go into the battle against the old man. Now the thing is I only have Pound and another Sketch at this point, and I don't want to waste the Sketch here, because I have another Pokemon in mind I'd like to steal the move from. So I'm going to turn into the Abra and hope that I can take down the team without resorting to needing another move. Anyway, we go for Fire Punch into the Shroomish and Pound into the Horsey, and Fire Punch nearly takes down Shroomish in a single hit. Tackle doesn't really do that much to the Ditto. Go for Pound to finish off Shroomish, and Thunder Punch should finish off Horsey, and the old man went down pretty easily. No, the move I wanted in particular was Thunderbolt from Pikachu, because it's 95 base power, and at this point in the game, that's incredibly high. So I use Sketch to steal Thunderbolt from Pikachu, and we move on to the Blue Power Ranger, of course, because we have super effective damage. Anyway, with that, let's go ahead and commence just a little bit of rambling. If you are enjoying this video so far, consider giving it a like, and if you have any Pokemon suggestions, please put them down below. Now, Ditto was one of the Pokemon I was dreading doing, especially when I used to do all these singles focused videos, because I knew for a fact that it wasn't going to be great. And on the flip side, I was thinking about Smeargle for quite a while, thinking about the best moves for it to learn, and I thought that Smeargle was going to do great. Not saying that it's not going to do great, just compared to Ditto. However, when I see that attack and special attack stat being only 20, I do have some worry. Anyway, at Mount Battle, I pick up the move Water Pulse from this Mudkip, and then I go into the battle against Laverina. She leads with a Love Disc and a Beautifly, And I go for Transform into the Beautifly and Thunderbolt into Love Disc. However, it's not a one-shot. Water Gun really isn't doing too much damage though. And Gust doesn't really do too much damage to Smeargle either. Go for Thunderbolt to finish off the Love Disc. And go for Gust to start dealing damage to the Roselia. Which it actually does quite a lot too. Another Gust and a Thunderbolt into the Beautifly, which also doesn't quite take it down. I get poisoned by Poison Sting, and Gust does a ton of damage to my Ditto. And then out comes Delcatty, which is her only Shadow Pokemon. I go for Gust and Thunderbolt into it, but Shadow Rush finishes off Smeargle, and Beautifly finishes off the other with Gust. Okay, well I go into the battle once again, now with another level or two, and this being the third attempt. And I decide this time not to go after the Love Disc because it really only has Water Gun to deal damage, so it doesn't really do that much damage anyway. Go for Gust into Roselia just as before, and then Gust and Thunderbolt into the oncoming Delcatty to do as much damage to it as I can right off the bat. Water Gun gets a crit, unfortunately. Gust doesn't really do that much to Delcatty though. Go for Thunderbolt into it, getting a lucky crit. Shadow Rush goes into Smeargle, and Ditto survives with just a little bit of HP, so I decide to go for Absorb to start healing. Thunderbolt takes down the Delcatty, Water Gun takes Smeargle down to 9, another Absorb takes the Love Disc down to half, and Thunderbolt finishes it off. Okay, well a third try victory isn't too bad. We move on to the obligatory Mirror Bee. How you doing, Mirror Bee? Also, you might think that I should probably do this battle for the Magnet item, and I did get the Magnet item, but I lost the battle, so I lost the Voltorb. Anyway, I go to the Railgam Tower to do absolutely nothing. There's nothing to do here this time. And this has nothing to do with anything. However, if you look at the little icons for Seviper up at the top, you can see that it's actually dependent on the way it's facing. That's kind of cool. Anyway, I go ahead and steal the move Giga Drain from the Nuzleaf, and I go to the Pokemart here and realize that Ditto really only needs HP ups, so I can invest all the other ones into the Smeargle, because it's definitely more important that it be stronger. And then we move on to the battle against Snaddle. He leads with a Lantern and a Quagsire. I go for Thunderbolt into the Lantern, doing very little damage, and transform into Quagsire because I know it has Ice Punch, which could definitely be very helpful. But it's not very good against his lead Pokemon. I go for Giga Drain to take down his Quagsire, but somehow it survives despite being 4 times weak to it. Go for a Water Gun to finish it off, and then out comes the Lunatone, which will set up Shadow Sky because I'm definitely too weak to take it down. Go for Ice Punch and Giga Drain, hoping that I might get a freeze, but I'm outsped, so Shadow Sky gets put up anyway, and Fruity Pebbles start raining down. Okay, well, another Ice Punch and another Giga Drain, and I will be able to take down the Lunatone, unless I get crit and move down, and then all that's left is Smeargle, who gets taken down to 3 HP by the Fruity Pebbles. So I'm able to take down the Lunatone, but I only have 6 HP and definitely can't survive another Shockwave. Okay, well that's a bit unfortunate, but I think clearly I'm just not strong enough, so I decide to go to Mount Battle to go do a bit of training, at least until I'm able to take down the Quagsire with a single Giga Drain. So I go into the battle once again, transform into the Lantern this time, and that's because Lantern just has better moves for the rest of his team, and also is just faster as well. So I'm just going to ignore the Quagsire this time, and take down the Lantern, which hangs on by just a thread, so maybe another level would have made that a guaranteed 2-shot, but Pound finishes it off, and then I get a free Water Gun into Lunatone, which does just about half, so it will probably still set up Shadow Sky unfortunately, but Giga Drain to heal back up some, and then Water Gun will finish it off, and then out comes Cast Form, which could be threatening if it decides to use Icy Wind and lower our speed further. Pretty Pebbles rain down, and now that I know for a fact Quagsire can go down in a single hit, I decide to finish it off and get a whole bunch of health back, and nearly to full. Then out comes his final Pokemon, which is Matang. Shockwave takes Cast Form down to half, and another Shockwave should be able to take it down. So I decide to start attacking the Matang with Smeargle. and it's doing about a third. Get a lucky paralysis. Shockwave finishes off the cast form, and I should be strong enough just to finish off the Metang now. Go for Shockwave and Thunderbolt, and Shockwave finishes it off. Okay, well, Snaddle wasn't too bad, but it did take a couple levels. Moving on, I pick up what I think might be the best move in the game, Rock Slide, and I run into another Smeargle. Hello, Smeargle. Goodbye, Smeargle. And then we go into the battle against Gonzap. He leads with an Electrode and a Nuzleaf. I go for Rock Slide on the first turn, but get faked out. Spark into Ditto. I transform into Electrode, and then I go for Sonic Boom into the Electrode and then Rock Slide, which doesn't really do too much damage, but I do get a lucky flinch on both. I go for Spark and Giga Drain into the Electrode to finish it off. Get a crit, but it's not enough to take it down. I get paralyzed. Then out comes Vileplume, but because I'm paralyzed, there's almost no way I'm going to actually be able to take it down, and I get finished off by Hyper Beam anyway. Spark does get a paralysis, but there's no way for me to really do too much damage to the Vileplume, and a crit takes me down to 1 HP. I get put to sleep. I call to wake myself up, but it's already too late, unless I get a paralysis on the Vileplume. Spark isn't enough to take down Nuzleaf, and I go down. Okay, well, going into the battle once again, now the 5th attempt and 6 levels higher, and that's because this battle is extremely difficult, and that's because you need to hit the Electrode with at least a few physical moves, which always leaves yourself open to being paralyzed by static, and then once Electrode goes down, then the Vileplume comes out, which is resistant to all of our moves, basically, other than Facade or Rock Slide. So I am just looking for a paralysis here, which I do get, and now I'm just hoping that it gets paralyzed enough so that I'm not constantly having to fight off sleep. Unfortunately, it does get off the first sleep. Facade takes it down under half. It misses a Hyper Beam. Go for a Thunderbolt and a Facade to finish it off. And then out comes the next Pokemon, which is immune to Electric. However, it is deathly afraid of Giga Drain. Unfortunately, it doesn't one-shot, so I do need to finish it off with Facade as well. And then out comes Skarmory, which is probably his weakest Pokemon because a couple of Thunderbolts is enough to finish it off. And all that's left is the Nuzleaf, who hits with one last Hyper Beam and goes down to the same combo of Spark and Thunderbolt again. Okay, well, that took quite a few attempts and quite a while. So moving on, we find another Smeargle. Goodbye, other Smeargle. And we run into Gorgon, who leads with a Celio and a Lairon. And up until this point, it was always better just to turn into the opponent's Pokemon because they were always just better on stats. However, I'm now 20 levels higher than the opponents, so I think that turning into Smeargle is just better. And apparently Ditto can't use Sketch. Anyway, I sketch Protect because I want to be able to use that later on. But unfortunately, the Ditto now doesn't have Protect. Anyway, I finish off the Celio with a Thunderbolt, and then out comes the Slowking, who takes a Giga Drain, healing me up a little bit. Not as much damage as I thought it'd do. 2 Thunderbolts should take it down though. And then out comes Ursaring, which might be his strongest Pokemon because it has Brick Break. And Iron Tail finishes off my Smeargle, and I'm down to 1 Smeargle left, and Brick Break takes down the other one. Okay, well, after 4 more attempts and getting basically nowhere, I decide to do a lot of training at Mount Battle. So I now come back for my 6th attempt at level 55 and 59 respectively. So I should be able to take down the Celio in a single hit now, which I still do not, despite being 5 levels higher, so I do get hit by Earthquake. I go for Thunderbolt and Thunderbolt once again though, to take down the Celio and do damage to the incoming Slowking, which does get taken down below half health luckily. So I'm able to do the same and start doing damage to the Ursaring coming in, which it's not very specially bulky, so this should do quite a bit of damage. Go for double Protect just so Ditto can heal a little bit, and then go for Thunderbolt and Thunderbolt into it to finish it off. And then out comes his first Shadow Pokemon, which is a Shadow Primeape. Iron Tail hits, doing quite a bit of damage to Ditto. Go for a double Thunderbolt into the Primate because I know that its Shadow Rushes do a ton of damage. And down below half, and finish it off. And then out comes his final Pokemon, which is Hypno. And this thing is extremely dangerous because it does have Shadow Storm. So I go for a double Protect here, just to heal up what I can, and then start going for Giga Drain into the Lairon to take as much health as I can from it as well. And then all that's left is the Shadow Hypno, which actually doesn't do too much damage to both of us, but if it's a single target, it does quite a lot more damage. And now that it's just the Hypno, I start going for the Prairie Dog strat of protecting and rock sliding, hoping for flinches, and taking as little damage as I can from Shadow Storm. And it actually turns out to be quite effective. Now, I probably could have just taken him down here, but it wasn't worth risking it at all, so I went ahead and did it one more time. And a Thunderbolt finishes it off. So that took quite a while, but we got past it. And I'm here to break some bad news to you. They're currently at 14 hours in-game time getting to the last area of the game, so their tier list placement isn't going to be good. Anyway, at level 61, I learned another sketch, and with this one, I'm going to sketch Ice Beam from the Gorbis. And that's because it's just an incredible move, especially for the late game, because there's a lot of dragon types. So Ice Beam hits into Ditto, and I go for Ice Beam into the Gardevoir and sketch to steal the Ice Beam from the Gorbis. Thunder Punch does quite a bit of damage to Ditto and paralyzes it, which is a little unfortunate. Ice Beam freezes Smeargle. Okay, I defrost immediately though, that's lucky. Now that I have Ice Beam, I can start doing a ton of damage to these Pokemon, and I get frozen again, are you kidding me? But then I immediately defrost. This battle is just RNG playing with my heart right now. Anyway, I should be able to take down the Farfetch'd in a single Ice Beam. And then out comes Altaria, her final Pokemon. And that should also just go down to a single Ice Beam. So Ice Beam takes it down, and then all that's left is the opponent Gorbis, which takes me down to 9 HP. Not enough to finish me off. Another Ice Beam and Giga Drain to finish it off. A surprising first try victory. Anyway, I run into another Smeargle. Goodbye, other Smeargle. Before getting to the top of the mountain and going to the battle against Snattle once again. He leads with Matang and Quagsire this time. Go for Giga Drain, which does take down Quagsire this time. Out comes Scizor. I transform into my other Smeargle, and then go for Ice Beam and Ice Beam into the Scizor, and realize that this isn't going to work. I'm doing too little damage, and I don't really have any good moves for taking down Scizor. Sure, I can get lucky on the flinches, which is just another thing that makes Rock Slide amazing, but I don't think it's a viable strategy for actually getting past this point. However, I'm not really sure what else to do. But I am eventually able to take down the Scizor, and then out comes Solrock, which sets up Shadow Sky if I'm not able to take it down on the first turn. Go for Giga Drain into it, and that's about half, and that's over half. Okay, well that's good. Out comes Castform, Psychic, not doing too much damage. Go for a double Protect just to heal up some. Flamethrower, go for Ice Beam and Ice Beam, which doesn't do quite half, but surprisingly we're able to take it down, probably just a high range. And then out comes the final Pokemon, which is Shadow Starmie. So as long as I'm able to take it down with a couple of Giga Drains, I should be fine. Never mind, that's not nearly enough damage, and Shadow Storm comes in and sweeps Smeargle off its feet, and Psychic finishes off the other one. Okay, well, if you thought that was a pretty close fight, it really wasn't, and this is now the 5th attempt. And I realized that I could turn into the Scizor. I don't know why that didn't occur to me for the first 4 attempts, but as you'll see at the end of this, I don't think it really mattered, just because of how close it ends up being. And I think I needed these levels anyway. Anyway, the Scizor hits me with a Steel Wing. Silver Wind, I'm hoping for an Omni Boost to raise up all my stats by 1 stage, so I'm going to keep using it. Ice Beam takes Scizor down to a quarter, and Silver Wind takes it down. Out comes Solrock. Now, unfortunately, I do think I'm slower than Solrock, so it will be able to set up Shadow Sky, which isn't great, but as long as it goes down, it's probably fine. So it does, and then Thunder Punch really not doing that much damage. As long as I don't get paralyzed, I'm fine though. Fruity Pebbles rain down, but as you can see, the Scizor is actually getting pretty low now. And Ice Beam does do quite a bit to the cast form, takes it down below half, and Silver Wind takes it down. And I do have one last Silver Wind for the Starmie. So I go for it, and I'm not sure if it's going to be a one-shot, so I decide to go for a Rock Slide, just to hope for a flinch. I don't get a flinch. Shadow Break hits, takes me down to 13 health. Metang does get flinched though, and Fruity Pebbles brings me down to 2 HP. I heal up to 13 because I decided to swap who had the leftovers, and go for Ice Beam, taking Metang down to half, and Steel Wing taking it down to red. And Psychic finishes off Smeargle, and Ditto survives on 10 HP and is able to finish off Metang. A very close fight, but we move on to Ardos, who leads with a Shadow Swallow and a Alakazam. And I'm going to have Ditto turn into Alakazam, because if you're going to have a fast special attacker, you may as well be Alakazam instead of Smeargle. Unfortunately, it does get a crit on Smeargle with a Psychic, doing a ton of damage. Ice Beam does very little Kingdra, and Ice Punch doesn't do much better. Dragon Breath takes down the Smeargle, and now all that's left is Alakazam. Go for another Ice Punch, which takes down Kingdra. Out comes Heracross. And I decide to go for Fire Punch here, which doesn't quite take it down. And I go down. Okay, well, obviously, some mistakes were made. The first being is that I still need to copy the Alakazam, because it's definitely just the best Pokemon to become. But I don't want to Ice Punch, I want to Psychic into Kingdra, because if it's going to be neutral, I may as well be getting Stab and the extra damage, which does end up taking it down in a single hit. Then out comes Heracross, which is the same. I should be using Psychic, not Fire Punch, because it is part fighting. I go for Rock Slide here to start doing damage to Alakazam, get a lucky crit. Psychic takes down Heracross in a single hit, and then out comes his second Shadow Pokemon, which is Electabuzz. I go for Psychic and Rock Slide, because I know that I can't take it down in a single hit with Psychic or Ice Beam. But if I get a flinch, and okay, well that almost took it down. Now I need to prepare for the Snorlax coming out, which luckily both Rock Slides do hit. And then out comes Snorlax, which is definitely the most dangerous Pokemon. Because I'm using special attackers, I don't really have anything too strong to hit it with. Psychic gets a crit, taking it down to red health though. Okay, well that's incredible. Go for Rock Slide, which takes it down to red health. Just one more Rock Slided, and it misses. Luckily Shadow Wind misses. Go for another Rock Slide, leaves it on a sliver, and I'm finally able to take it down. Okay, definitely a little scary there, but we got it. Moving on to Gorgon once again. He leads with a Slowking and an Ursaring. And this is actually the second attempt, because the first attempt I just got some bad luck. So it's not really worth showing, the strategy is still the same. Anyway, basically Brick Break is an incredible move. Nearly takes down the Ursaring opponent in a single hit. I go for Earthquake and Protect to finish off what I was hoping would be both of them, but I should have known that Ursaring was going to protect that turn because Slowking was still out. Anyway, go for Brick Break into Aggron, which I know does one-shot it, and take down the Ursaring with Ice Beam. And then, strange from normal, I'm actually going to leave the Walrein alive for the rest of this fight because it's not really that much of a threat. Go for Giga Drain into the Poliwrath, it sets up Shadow Sky. Ice Beam, go for Slash, doesn't quite take down the Poliwrath, but I will be able to take it out next turn. Go for Slash and Giga Drain. And really the biggest threat to come out is Mr. Mime. Because neither of my Pokemon are especially defensive, Mr. Mime is a big threat. Unfortunately, Smeargle does get finished off by Ice Beam though. I do get a lucky crit on the Mr. Mime. And then all that's left is the Walrein, which unless it freezes me, can't win the one-on-one. So one last Brick Break seals Gorgon's fate, and an easy second try. I go back to Mount Battle to go pick up another sketch and teach it over Giga Drain. And that's because of this Breloom right here. Goodbye, Breloom. Anyway, I don't need him. What I do need is for my Breloom to use Spore. And that is the move I'm going to be copying, because Spore is a 100% accurate sleep move, and something Smeargle is known very well for competitively. So I go into the battle against Eldis, and I go for Transform into my own Smeargle, and Ice Beam to start doing damage to Manectric. Unfortunately, it's not a one-shot. I go for Ice Beam to finish off the Manectric, and Spore to put Ninjask to sleep so it stops doing damage. And unfortunately, Manectric survives on just a sliver of health. Luckily, it misses a second Shadow End, so I'm able to take it down, and then start doing damage to the Salamence coming out right after, which is 4 times weak to Ice, but because we're so weak, I doubt it's going to take it down in a single hit. It doesn't. I go for Ice Beam into it once again, which takes it down, and then out comes Flygon, which also probably won't go down, but it does. Okay, well then out comes Marowak. I don't need that sketch. Out comes Marowak, which should probably go down to a single Ice Beam, I would guess. Okay, maybe not. Ice Beam finishes it off, and then out comes his final Pokemon, which is Lapras. And because I don't want to risk anything, I go for Spore into the Lapras, because I don't want it to set up Shadow Sky or start using Shadow Storms. Take down the Ninjask with Ice Beam, and all I need to do is use a couple of Rock Slides. Okay, maybe more than a couple of Rock Slides. Maybe like 5 Rock Slides. Yep, looks like 5 Rock Slides. It wakes up, sets up Shadow Sky. For this point, as long as we don't both miss, I should be fine. And Lapras goes down and Eldis is defeated. Of course, before we can go to the final battle, we have to beat the big box legendary, Shadowlugia, who I Spore, and I begin to start hitting with Ice Beam. Which, that does about a quarter. That does half. So one more set of those should be enough to take it down. Okay, pretty easy fight. Now into the final battle. And I'm actually going to skip the first final battle, and that's because really nothing changes between the first and the second. The strategy is still the same, it's just on the second attempt I get a little luckier, so there's no real reason to show the first one. Anyway, I go for Ice Beam to take down the Rhydon, and Spore to sleep the Moltres. Out comes Executor, which takes an Ice Beam, nearly going down in a single hit. Go for a double Rock Slide to finish off the Executor and start doing damage to Moltres. Out comes Tauros, and another Rock Slide, which unfortunately misses. I then go for Spore into Tauros and start the Rock Slide again, which hits both, taking Moltres down to half. Go for double Rock Slide once again, which should finish off the Moltres as long as they both hit. And then out comes the Articuno, and the strategy stays exactly the same. I go to sleep it and Rock Slide again, which it goes to sleep. And Tauros is still sleeping, luckily. I decide to swap over to Ice Beam, though, to take down the Tauros, and that's because I want to get Zapdos out, and I want to take down Zapdos as quick as possible. And that's because at the moment, even though Rock Slide is really strong, its damage is getting reduced by the fact that it is hitting multiple targets. So if I can take down the Zapdos, I'll be doing more damage to the Articuno. Unfortunately, I get the wrong turn order, and I end up Rock Sliding first and then taking down Zapdos, and Articuno sleeps through it anyway. I run out of Rock Slides on Ditto, but it should be good enough to finish it off, and basically an untouched final battle. So the final battle was really easy, but unfortunately these two ended with a time of 18 hours, 15 minutes, and 24 seconds at level 72 for Smeargle and level 68 for Ditto, and lost 41 times throughout the game, which isn't great. The time is really bad, the losses are pretty bad. The only thing it really has going for it is the fact that they didn't do awful against the bosses, but the amount of time spent actually making those numbers be lower, it cost them way too much time to be viable, so unfortunately they find themselves in the D tier, which isn't great, and in fact they find themselves next to the Nincado line, which is notable for having Shedinja, one of the most gimmicky Pokemon. Now it is quite better than the Ninjask line. But I do think there are a few good reasons for their downfall. The first being is that even though Sketch is incredible, you have to go out of your way to go find moves to use, which meant that I had to do Mount Battle not once but twice to go get Water Pulse, because I hadn't quite planned the levels correctly. So I ended up being a level short when I got to the boss, and on top of that, just Smeargle in general has some pretty bad offensive stats, only being base 20 in both, so that's really not great. And because Ditto has to rely on turning into Smeargle at the end, it actually did pretty good. But Ditto's main issue is that it's always reactionary, because you have to turn into a Pokemon before you can even start. In Gen 5, I believe it gets the Imposter ability, which is really good for it. However, I don't think it's nearly as good in this game specifically, because it just, I believe, transforms you into the Pokemon directly across from you, so I wouldn't have any say on who it became, other than kind of just swapping the party around. Anyway, with that being said, unfortunately they find themselves very low. But if you did enjoy this video, consider liking and subscribing. If you have any Pokemon suggestions, please put them down below. And, bye.